Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Unicus Radio Hour. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. It's a pleasure to be with you again. So, Thoughtful Thursday, September 12th, 2013. Hope you're well. It's actually Friday the 13th, down under. I'm hoping that the ceremony went well for the original people of Australia. Our special guest this evening is James Horak. He's returning to give us an update on a very, very wild story that he reported here recently about an RFID chip allegedly being found in the skull of Napoleon. James, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Robert. I hope you're doing well this evening.
I am fine, thank you. As long as the technology's working, I'm good.
Understood.
So, speaking of technology, how is it that you learned of this RFID chip allegedly being just found in the skull? And the other thing I'm curious about is, why did they even exhume him to do this, any kind of examination on Napoleon?
Well, it's customary, especially with historical figures, but of course there's probably more to it than that than we'll never be told about.
I see.
When you're discussing things of this magnitude, you really don't know what kind of game is in play. I can only guess.
All right. So I think you told me that this has not been made public, and yet somehow you found out about it. Isn't that how you positioned it?
Well, I've known about the time intervention that it involves.
Oh, I see. Was there a public source that you can name as far as...
No, I just happened to know about it, and then it started being talked about.
Oh, I see.
And has been resourced from different points of view on different sites now for a while.
Right.
Its significance, of course, comes about with respect to world developments today and the fact that we are headed for oblivion. We're right on the verge of World War III, and there doesn't seem to be any wisdom in the decisions making at the level that could avert it. So
yeah.
There's no point not talking about it. It's a matter that is very difficult to comprehend for most people because I make a simple statement over and over again most people can't put their heads around, and that is, if time travel is possible, has ever been possible, will ever be possible, it is with us now.
Okay. Well, yes, you'd mentioned to me before, and this audience, you said that there was a big event happening on September 9th, and apparently it must be successful because we're still here, right?
Yes, and that was the base timeline for creating this alternative timeline by changing history due to that intervention, which was to put behavioral bias chip in Napoleon, which led to him starting to act like what he hated most, and that was the elite monarchs, emperors of Europe, and the Jesuits, who were continuing to conduct a new Inquisition. And everywhere where Napoleon succeeded, he removed the Inquisition. That's one of the first things he'd tackle. And he'd destroy the records. Sometimes he'd make them public. I wouldn't say he was a democracy because democracy didn't have much meaning at the time, but he wanted a continuation of the revolution. And then after that chip's put in his head, it isn't but a few years later that he is declaring himself emperor and carrying on the trappings of almost a new dynasty of royalty in France, so soon after they had rid themselves of the Ancien regime. And instead of being a forwarding advance on the revolution, he became steps back. And so it's not much of a projection to suggest that he might have made the same kind of revision to his military prowess and even his military conduct and perhaps secret agenda at Waterloo. But in the base timeline, the timeline fully manifested, he wins at Waterloo. In this timeline, which was created the instant that this alternative was created on September 9th of this year, of course, it went the other way, and we are at the mercy of the Rothschilds because of it. The loss at Waterloo enabled the Rothschilds, who had foreseen this, which suggests who was instrumental in what happened on September 9th, to plot out a method of investments that brought them equal in financial power and prowess to the Crown of England. And since that time, they've enjoyed gathering wealth and concentrating that wealth into machination after machination, World Banks, the IMS, the Internal Revenue Service, and so forth, being able to afford their own private army we call the Illuminati, which is an army of gangsters. And from there on, being able to establish such influences as to provide for a holy Jewish homeland where they could concentrate their wealth and have complete control over the government. And that's what exists today in Israel.
Okay, so when you say complete control of the government, you're talking about the Israeli government or all the government?
The Zionist government of Israel.
Okay, gotcha. And do you think they're the ones behind this move towards Syria?
They're a big part of it. Of course, you have to understand who they serve. They get their power from being part of the State Department's chief concern over protecting the interests of the Seven Sisters or the big oil companies.
Right.
So right now, the concentration is on the IMF, the IRS, the constituents of the international banking system, at this time continuing to float the petrodollar. And the petrodollar is the only thing that prevents hyperinflation in this country overnight. So you have a number of people that are brought into being duplicitous in this move against Syria and eventually Iran, because it is part of a 7-stage move against the Middle East to take over that part of the world and to bring closer a full implementation of the New World Order in all its trappings, which to 99% of us, not 95%, but 99% of us, this works against not just our best interests, but our lives.
Yeah, I think you're talking about our future. So does the base timeline still exist?
Of course. It exists in full manifestation, and this one does not.
It's still not fully manifested. Okay.
It can't be. It can't be.
So it's sort of like a shadow of the original?
Yes, it's a trailing shadow. That's very well put because, I tell people to do this all the time. If you will get a program in which you can plot the sky at night from your location and the date, go out and make a comparison, you'll see it's never exact. It's never what it should be according to that program. And sometimes it varies a great deal, like the sun is setting way too far to the south or the north, or the moon isn't where it should be as you track it across the sky, even in migration. Number of anomaly, of course, these are all dismissed. If you will notice, the geological, the archaeological, and historic anomalies are as easily dismissed and put away on a shelf and forgotten, no matter what the evidence and no matter what is professed one way or the other in trying to reconcile them, that there is. And that has been conventional science and astronomy's attempt to suppress awareness for 50 years. Give you a good case in point, if you will ever try to find a transient lunar phenomena that existed and was in the public domain for 275 years, it's now classified, but it'll back up many of the things that people like Jose Escamilla and my late friend Kevin Smith discussed about the anomaly on the moon. These were records that were kept by astronomers faithfully for 275 years of anomaly that they would find. These included tracks along the inside crater walls, lights, movement, all sorts of artificial structures that would be there one moment and then gone the next. It's transient.
Right.
They kept faithful records of this up until the 30s, as a matter of fact. Even with lower-grade telescopes that are used in observatories, people could see the green canali on Mars. They were networked and were obviously artificial. And the more noticeable and more evident polar caps. Of course, up to World War II, these disappeared. This is one of the things that gave a lot of teeth to the Orson Welles rendition of War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. What made that so credible is that in the announcement, it's mentioned this is an attack from Mars and so forth, because people were still aware of these green cannoli. And, of course, they would repute them to intelligent life that built them. And, of course, it made it even more credible.
Right, right. Well, okay, so what happened to the canals?
Well, in the late 30s, there were flashes seen at both poles. The poles began to grow smaller and smaller, and the cannoli just went away.
Whoa, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. They just, okay.
But, of course, it was an Italian astronomer, obviously, that named them.
Right.
And there's a history of this. But, of course, you know, as we talk, history is being rewritten more and more. Even events today that we had very close particulars about, articles written about, they're disappearing. There are people that go out that work for the CIA and the FBI and pick up books they don't want you to know about and destroy them. So this is an ongoing thing. It's not like the book burnings of yore. It is more subtle and more insidious, because it leaves a lot of people like myself talking about things that I read about, and then I try to bring up, and there's no source for them. And, of course, back then, you couldn't believe that an entire issue, for instance, of the National Geographic would just disappear, not be in their archives or whatever. I can give you an example of one that just disappeared, and there might be some of your listeners out there that read that article and can say, yeah, whatever happened to that? You mean I can't find one anymore?
Okay, what issue are you talking about?
Within the year of Chernobyl, there was a 30-some-odd page article in National Geographic which gave a blow-by-blow description of what happened. And it throws absolute responsibility, the intentional responsibility of this, on Gorbachev, who ordered it. And it gives a blow-by-blow description of how it happened. I can give you a summary of that right now.
Please do.
There was a group of men that showed up at reactor number 1. This building had 2 reactors. The number 2 reactor, they kept running and online for about 10 years after number 1 went blue. And this group of men show up, and they have orders signed by Gorbachev. They go to the control room of reactor number 1 and order them to fire it up 100%, which you don't usually ever run a reactor at 100%. After it's fired up to 100%, they order the cooling system taken offline. Nothing happens. Then they order the backup cooling system taken offline, and then you can guess what happened. And that is in that issue of National Geographic.
Wow. But you say that's been removed.
I still may have a copy of it in my garage. I had that with some other books that were equally books that I wanted to keep for sure, and I had them stuffed back, I thought, hidden in the hot water heater blue. Leaked on that box, and I went out there, and they had set for a while because I didn't realize that it had gotten up that far in those boxes, and they were all mildewed, and I may have thrown it away. I haven't looked because the garage door has been off its hinges, and I've got a big safe that's in the way. So I just kind of let it go by. But in recent years, I brought this up, so I may venture out there and take a chance on getting clobbered by a garage door to see if I still have it. I also have some other things that I've mentioned and talked about that people are having a great deal of difficulty finding.
Yeah.
This issue was within the year that went. It shows an aerial view of the cooling tower smoking and part of the reactor housing blown away. So it is pretty obvious, and I think it was probably taken from a helicopter.
Okay, so let's speculate. Why would Gorbachev do something like that, knowing it would cause so much damage to his country?
He was a plant.
I see.
He was one of Kissinger's fair-haired boys, and his whole purpose was to bring down the Soviet Union, and that's exactly what he did, and this was the final nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union.
Wow. Okay. That's why
he could speak English as well as you or as well as I can.
Yeah.
He was educated in the United States, but he always pretended to have an interpreter. He was a plant.
That's why he seemed to be good friends with Ronald Reagan.
Of course. Good friends with all the members of CFR because he was one.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm getting a kick out of all the pundits. They're pissing their pants about Putin. Yes, that was an alliteration, folks. He would even dare to mention God, in a New York Times editorial. It just cracks me up because the level of rhetoric has been ratcheted up so high right now, and there's no clear national security interest in Syria that I've heard stated or seen evidenced at all. And so I don't know why these guys are so hot to trot. You heard this term before, wargasm?
Yeah. Well, have you heard this phrase before, eternal war?
Well, that's the planet. That's our planet. Yeah, unfortunately.
This is also the policy that has been adopted by the globalists.
All right. Now, is this part of, let's get back to what you were saying before about this divergent timeline that we're on. In the base timeline, are they peaceful over there, do you think? I mean, were we originally...
I'm not allowed to say. I've already said something that I wouldn't have said before the 9th. Okay. And that is, I had a lot of people say, well, what's going to happen if this happens, if that happens? And I talked about how this is an alternative timeline as partial manifestation and suggested it had no hope of anything better. Also, that the monsters in this timeline would try to manifest this timeline fully by destroying the base timeline, which is the reason that you have CERN. They tell you that it's God particle. Listen, what I'm telling you makes a lot more sense than what they claim. Yeah. A lot more sense.
I'm starting to see it now. I get what you're saying, James, but how... CERN. Okay, I'm sorry. How are we connected? How is this divergent timeline we're on? How is it connected, if at all, to the base timeline?
It is reflexive. It's a reflexive connection. This is based on astrophysics. There are people that are probably out of work right now that are good astrophysicists that if they could hear me right now, they would probably say, yeah, he's been reading my dissertation, or he's been reading my thesis. Because what I'm going to talk about is, to them, theoretic physics. Nothing more, nothing less than theoretic physics.
Okay.
And that is that time travel being what it is, time travel enables an intervention or an intrusion. Now, if you have an intrusion, what happens? If you go in the future and you affect the past, what happens in between? Nothing happens in between, but you set an alternative set of options to progression, which is an alternative timeline. Now, if you sit down and reason, how else could it be any other way? But people here have a hard time wrapping their head around that you could go back in the past and affect the future, right on up to where we are now. That effect happens at the time that you intrude, or the period you intrude upon when you go back then. In other words, you stopped being fully manifested until this timeline caught up to now. Now it's still a partial manifestation, but it's reflexive with the base timeline.
I see. So
this is based on how can two systems inhabit the same solar system, even the same universe?
Right.
In order for that to occur, there has to be a reflex between the two. There are people that have conjectured, have dramatized this with parallel universe, parallel timeline. No such thing. No such thing. So what we have is a reflexive relationship instead of a parallel, where you have a duplicate and I have a duplicate, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because from the point where you have intruded, everything's going to happen differently.
Right.
If it's a intrusion of any magnitude, like changing the outcome of Waterloo, which led to the change of Waterloo. It set Napoleon up to fail by changing his behavior, by changing his bias, by changing his character, changing his values.
Understood. Well, I guess the question is, because I've been studying these things about portals, people passing through portals and coming back. Not always coming back, but recently this has been part of my research. Is it possible that we could travel to the base timeline and back? Okay.
Oh, you are so sly, Robert. You are so sly.
A yes or no would be fine.
Well, yeah, it's possible.
Okay.
It's possible.
I mean, look, I understand you have constraints, but I'm trying to figure this out specifically because, well, you know, Jerry's traveled somewhere. Jerry Wills, our friend Jerry, you know, passed through one of these portals. But my other friend Eddie, when in 1975, when he and his jet passed through some kind of a portal, he was still on Earth. Okay?
Yeah.
That was obvious. He was still on Earth, but it was very different. Everything about that island was different. It wasn't even on the map, but he was on Earth,
No.
and those were Earthlings. So now I'm starting to believe that the reason we're even having this discussion is sort of to help further my understanding of the dynamics involved, because, look, I feel a responsibility. We're addressing a lot of people here on this planet, and I don't want to just play mind games with them. I honestly don't know what's going on, but I'm trying to figure it out. And if I do get a clue, that's the whole point of this show, is I'm trying to share information as I find it and make these correlations. So that just came to me as I was talking to you. I started to see in my mind's eye that maybe this is the explanation for why people are, some of them are passing through these portals and returning. Very few of them return. It was baffling to me up until this very moment. Where are they going? Where is this other so-called alternative Earth? What is the purpose of all that? And I think you've answered it, although you're being a bit elusive. I understand why. I do understand why.
If I say things that could go back and create a third timeline,
Yeah.
that's another complication. Believe me, these get cleaned up eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Usually what happens with partial manifestations, it's like a clone. It's never right up to par with the original. And as you clone a clone, of course, you degrade until you get something that is of no profit to obtain at all.
Yeah.
This is what happens to timelines. And Stephen King produced a book and a movie of something that makes no other sense except in the fact of what happens to alternative partially manifested timelines called Langoliers. And in that movie, the only sense that movie makes is these people are in a base timeline. Somehow they get drawn into an alternative timeline just before it is being obliterated or cleaned up by people that are responsible for maintaining the continuum pure.
Wow.
And, of course, it's dramatized. I mean, you don't have these critters eating trees like you do in that movie, but nonetheless, and I will say this because I keep getting pressed by people, that's not a good enough explanation. We want to know why, since we know so many good people, this can't persist. All these lives he's spent experience can't have meaning. And I say to them that in a universe where there's a consciousness constantly looking for variation that adds new dimensions and new values to existence, do you think that if you become something spectacular, something of value to that equation, that you won't persist? So that's all I'll say on that score, but it's enough if you think about it.
Yes, I do. I understand what you're saying. And, okay, so the divergent timeline that we're on that is partially manifest, what can we do to improve this situation, if anything?
Clean up the planet, clean up the corrupt governments and the corrupt systems. I hear all these people ragging on the Republican form of government, ragging on the Constitution and all that. It's because they don't understand it. They don't read it.
Yeah.
It was designed to prevent everything that's going on today.
Okay.
But when you start breaking the checks and balances of the system that was handed to you on a silver platter, and everything was meant to protect you, and it gave you inviolable rights. It gave you a sense of dignity for everyone. It gave you a law that is equal before all. And you slowly let that erode away, not just the principles, but the very practice of it at all levels. When you let that erode away, you sit there on your hands listening to the excuses, listening to the expedience that was described by doing this, by changing your social contract with the powers that be, you got what you asked for. And now it's time to realize where it leads, to wake up and see that it is leading to extinction, and take your power back, put those in power out of power by any means necessary, and then clean up your government. Those that have committed criminal acts, give them the same justice that they would give you, and progress on. Find ways to maintain the social contract as it was intended. There's nothing wrong with it. The Constitution of the United States of America is the only improvement on the Magna Carta there is, and it is a work of brilliance. And anyone that challenges it is either an idiot or a criminal. And all these changes to it over the years should be reviewed for their need. If they don't affect the freedoms, if they don't affect the rights of the citizen, then you can consider them. But they should not be passed by a body of men representing others who have no vote. And first of all, clean up the voting methods in this country. There is a movie called Hacking America that is a documentary, and everyone should see, to see how the last two elections, or the last three elections in this country have been decided. It will outrage you. There should be no PACs. There should be no lobbies. There should be no one bribing politicians with campaign contributions to change their vote. That's corruption. If you don't know that, and it can't be spelled out to you, then you're an idiot. You're a moral idiot.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, this boob in office right now has just allowed anyone to make any campaign contribution without any disclosure whatsoever.
Wow.
Everything that he's done is to make things worse.
Yeah.
Now, I know there are people that have made excuses for him and said, oh, well, he's just a puppet. He has to do what he's told or he'll get killed, like
Kennedy?
Like Kennedy and like Robert Kennedy. Oh, yeah, sure. If that's the best you can do in apologizing for this tyrant, I pity you, because you don't have the historical knowledge of a plum.
Well, since you'd mentioned Chernobyl, what is your take on Fukushima? And I said that correctly.
Yeah, Fukushima.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, exactly. It's only about 5,000 times worse than Chernobyl.
Okay.
Because Chernobyl was contained. It was one reactor, and it was contained enough that they could continue operating the reactor at the other end of the building, and people could survive. Of course, they were getting potassium iodide that had been shipped from the United States to help them. Because the Soviets, even though they had the second leading nuclear industry in the world, didn't have potassium iodide. And the AEC determined in the 50s that potassium iodide was the only treatment for radiation sickness there is. And the reason for that is it saturates the thyroid and prevents iodine-131 from getting in there and destroying your thyroid. And once your thyroid is gone, your blood immunity is gone, which any kind of other isotope is going to kill you much more easily. Plus, you only have one other form of immunity left in the colon. And guess what happens to that the first time you're giving any antibiotic? It sterilizes your colon. So now any kind of disease, even mumps, measles, or chickenpox, can kill you on the spot.
Wow. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, was this on some level intentional, the way they set that up?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It seems like part of the Georgia Guidestone's plan to murder a large portion of the population.
Well, they had a virus in their controls.
Really?
At Fukushima, yes. The toxic virus, which was engineered by the DOD just for this. And, of course, the people that were responsible for monitoring that equipment were Zionists, Israeli company.
Yeah.
And, of course, they also, since everything was shared with the Israeli military, they also had the toxic virus, which would give false reading that there was water pouring in on the cores when there wasn't.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, good Lord. So it wasn't just the MOX fuel being stored there and all that crap.
The MOX fuel was experimental, and it was in the reactors at reactor number 4. But here's the forte. They had thousands and thousands of tons of spent fuel rods that they were storing where? Over the cores.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, that's
I'll
crazy.
tell you something even crazier, Robert. And there is a nuclear expert that came out, and he was giving the truth about reactors and everything and saying if people would do what they were supposed to do, if regulations were maintained, if there weren't shortcuts taken to save money and everything, nuclear energy could be safe. But the fact of the matter is, that's not going to happen in this world.
No.
Hence, they're not safe.
Right.
And since the Crown of England owns most of the uranium deposits, they're not interested in companies taking these spent fuel rods and upgrading them the same way you would do ore. You can reconcentrate them and use them over and over again because the energy is there. It's just diminished.
Right.
So what you do is you reconcentrate it the same way the ore is. What do they do with uranium ore? They don't go out and find it highly radioactive. They go out and find it. They take and grind it.
Yeah.
They concentrate it. They use different methods to get the non-radioactive material out of it till it reaches a certain level of concentration, and then they cake it, set it out in the sun, and they can tell how fuel grade it's getting by the radon gas concentration giving off of it, which also will create a sense of time loss in anybody that's around it. That's where they first discovered that they could create time losses.
Whoa.
So,
time loss? What are you saying?
Well, there's lost time phenomena associated with the abduction. And the Black Ops figured out how to do that once they noticed what part of the brain the radon was affecting. And so that's part of...
See. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Then they concentrate this further until they produce a metal pellet. And that's what goes into the fuel rods. And, of course, you can go through that process. You can take a spent fuel rod and take these pellets out, melt them again, reconcentrate, do the same process until you have a fuel-grade fuel rod again. And, of course, it's just as cheap, if not cheaper, than starting with raw material.
Right.
And the big thing is that you don't have any waste.
So why isn't it being done, James?
Well, the Queen wouldn't make her next $1 trillion as fast.
Okay. All right. Okay, this is truly mad science. Don't they have any awareness of that they're going to literally kill the planet?
You know, I don't speculate on what mad men and mad women understand. Because madness, by definition, means that their understandings are not stable.
Yeah, I know. I know. I don't expect you to get into their head on this, but I just felt like I should ask it because it seems just so completely, utterly insane to be headed down this road. So, again, just if you can, please explain this divergent timeline that is not fully manifest. Is there still a possibility that it's just going to evaporate?
Oh, the timeline?
This one we're on, not the base timeline.
This timeline, unless something remarkable happens and it saves itself, will evaporate. Okay, as you put it.
Well, you could, I don't know what else to call it, dissipate. I mean, whatever. Same thing. You also mentioned or intimated that there were entities that were monitoring the continuum.
Yes.
So that obviously they must be monitoring the situation here pretty closely because it is utterly corrupt and unsustainable. So maybe, well, look, I'm not going to cry over it, honestly, because I know that there are other timelines. As you said, the consciousness continues on. It may be in a completely different way, and that's fine, because I'm not thrilled with what's going on here at all.
No.
Not to bum people out.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I've said this before.
Yeah.
When the time comes, there won't be but a handful of people that want to live on this planet any longer.
You mean on this timeline? Those in the future?
Well, I speak of it as a planet because to their senses, it's a planet. you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's virtual, but it's real enough because we're all in it together.
You are real. You're real to me.
Yeah, understood.
And I don't have to be here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for being here. I got the sense too. Yeah, that's one of the things that was really puzzling to me was my friend Eddie, which is not his real name, when he went through whatever it was, that portal, and was on the other world, how different the people were. And yet, far more perfect. And they knew a lot more, even though they lived what we consider to be a primitive lifestyle with no electricity or technology. They still had everything they needed. But the main thing that they actually had to do was respect nature and take care of one another, because everything else was provided for them. Everything else.
Exactly. And he should have stayed there.
Well, at some point, he wanted to. Look, he was a young naval officer. He really felt like he needed to get back to duty, but he couldn't get a radio signal out, which was very weird. His emergency radio /transponder wouldn't work. It was pinging back, which he'd never heard before, couldn't understand. I mean, he lost both his engines and the radio. Of course, once he lost the power, he couldn't radio out, and they obviously couldn't track him. He was gone for 6 months until the elders, he started getting depressed. And so they said, it's time for you to go. And he's like, what do you mean? I told you that from the day I got here. I needed to get back to my unit.
Well, they realized that he couldn't be happy there.
Yeah.
The hard thing for people to understand, because they're all technician motivated. They want a bigger and better deal on their cell phone. They want a bigger television set with 3D and with this and that and all. And this is fed to them. These aren't values that are innate.
Right.
Believe me, people would rather feel secure. People would rather have leisure time. People would rather have places to go to meet other people who have like ways of thinking and so forth, because the machines are taking away our greatest asset, and that is our being gregarious. Look at these little monsters that pilot the drones thinking that it's just a game, killing people, innocent people, and now they have the double hit. What kind of madness and meanness and nastiness is a double hit to wipe out the people that go to help the survivors from the first hit?
Oh, I didn't know that.
This has got to be the lowest humanity has been in a long time.
Yeah, we've lost our humanity. As you said, we're becoming more machine.
Yeah, these parents that desert their kids to the video games need to take a lesson from this. Yeah. They really do need to take a lesson from this. They are deserting their responsibility towards their children. They're deserting their responsibility to society at large.
Yeah.
And I don't say that wanting to be forgiving at all. You are participating in your own demise, as a friend of mine likes to put it. But the important thing is to understand, and the point I've made again and again, is that one of the best things that can happen to a civilization, whether it's here or in the base timeline, wherever it is to be invited in the extended community, because you don't have to worry about anything after that. You really don't.
Other than being disrespectful, because then you've really screwed up your relationship with the tribe or the family.
Well, you wouldn't be invited in there if you maintain collective or personal aberrancy, because that's just the way it is. But the real issue has never been technology. It has never been anything other than culture.
Right.
There are a lot of people that live, like your friend, who visited an island where people were living a pastoral life.
Yes.
There are many ETs that elect to live like that are members of the extended community. They live like that. They develop innate abilities, things that they can do with their mind because they employ them.
Right.
You get mixed up in this rat race. What do you employ? You don't employ anything but a degraded sense of value. You have no proper respect for your leisure time, therefore you don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
So you're constantly under the thumb of the man, and you're moving like a rat, going through a maze. And that's no way to live. That's no way to grow. That's no way to sustain higher values and to grow from the point of maturation all the way through your life. And then maybe you would live to your pure life expectancy, which is not 75, not 85, not 95 years, but 144 years, which is a sacred number to the arcane.
Yes.
Designated as the mortal life of the soul.
Okay. Some sort of harmonic or frequency. You know, what Eddie told me, too, is that the elders actually looked like 40 years old when they were 80-something. But he said their eyes had changed. The color of their eyes had changed from a bluish green to a dark black. I mean, other than that, everybody was extremely healthy because of the food, the air, the water. And that was the other thing he couldn't figure out, was how come there was no planes flying over or ships passing by, and yet there was like remnants of old shipwrecks, not a lot, but enough. And of course, the natives had scavenged this, the things that they wanted anyway, like furniture and clocks. They said the clocks were just a curiosity. They said the ticking actually, they said to him that it helped him sleep better. At least the elders thought it was soothing. That's what they used it for.
They certainly didn't respect time, did they?
Well, not.
They weren't a slave to time.
Not numerical time. They had a natural rhythm. They did keep. I asked him about this. I said, "Did they have a calendar?" And he said, "Yeah, but it was all astronomical, based on equinox and solstice." And he said they were the happiest people he'd ever met in his life, and the healthiest too, most well-adjusted and fully integrated, fully functional relationships that they were having. Because I asked him, I said, "Did you ever see anyone arguing or fighting?" And he said, "No, never. No." Can you imagine? It boggles my mind when I think about the difference of the way we live here on this timeline. Now that I know, I mean, see, I've been puzzling over this since the beginning of the year when I got that story, came completely out of left field, and I kept wondering, why am I getting this information? What is the point of all of this coming to me in like so highly focused, you know? I pay attention to things like that. Synchronicities like that don't just happen by accident. It happens on purpose. I mean, that's what a coincidence means. It's where things coincide, coming together. So anyway, I appreciate the fact that you were able to help me see that, but I'm a little, man, I think I'm really, I think I'm going around the bend, honestly. Now, no, I mean, it makes me feel a little nuts, James, now that I'm seeing it this way. Look, I don't mind being here, but I've always felt a pull towards what I guess you're going to call the base timeline. Specifically that way, that unadulterated way of life isn't just appealing to me, it speaks to my soul, okay? I ache for that, James. I ache for it.
Well, there have been a lot of people that have, in the early explorations, you've always heard of the mutiny on the Bounty.
Yes.
That's what that was all about. They didn't want to leave Tahiti.
Right.
And they found that pastoral way of life, and they saw how beautiful the women were. And they didn't want to get back on the ship, and yet they knew that if they sent Bligh on his way with the ship, he'd come back and hang him for mutiny. Right. So they took the ship and put him in a longboat. Bligh still managed to get to civilization and didn't lose a single member of the men that stuck with him. And
wow.
A lot of people don't really notice that after the Great Mutiny, Bligh became an admiral. And his account of the mutiny disagrees with the popular account, Mr. Hall's account, tremendously. And he wrote his version of the Mutiny of the Bounty. I've got a copy of it around here somewhere, so I know you can find it.
Right.
Everman Press edition. So, but the importance about a pastoral way of life is that it gives everyone leisure time. You know, they're elders, but there's no social strata that is earned by greed or avarice or lust for power or any of that. Yeah. An elder is selected on his wisdom, and you know, there's a consensus of who's wise, and it's usually on the money. Yeah. And, you know, we don't have that. We haven't had that in our politics. We haven't had it in our affairs of state for so damn long. We don't know what it tastes like anymore. But I'll tell you one thing. If there's one thing that the people of Earth hunger for, that they have a yearning, whether it's not totally realized or not, but it's there, it lies there, maybe even dormant, but it's there, and that's a yearning for justice.
Yes.
A yearning to see the rich and powerful get away with all they get away with and not being judged by the same laws and in the same way they would be.
Yeah, not vengeance.
Most of us cannot feel secure when we see this preferential treatment given the rich and powerful.
Right.
And since we're the vast majority, why in the hell do we put up with it?
It's a good question.
Why in the hell do we put up with it? You know, as far as I'm concerned, what anybody does to their body is their business.
Yeah.
If they want to put lye in it, if they want to put heroin, whatever they want to put in it that they can get without harming other people, the crimes occur when you harm other people. If it's yourself, that's your business. That's your business. And the way that the law is tied up in knots in the legal system over this war on drug BS, and the same is true with the way that it has dispersed our liberties and our freedoms to the winds, this war on terrorism. Why, the biggest terrorist I know is sitting in the White House.
Yeah.
He wants to bomb cities now for some actors playing roles of people getting nerve gas that the Syrian people never produced, never had, and there's no reason to believe they did. And if you fall for that, you still haven't learned the lesson of the weapons of mass destruction BS we were fed to send our men and women into death traps in Iraq.
Right.
And most of those death traps we caused because we exposed them to this uranium, this depleted uranium.
Yeah.
So how many children, innocent children, do you think are going to kill with these bombings that Nimwit in the White House has planned?
Mm-hmm. A lot. Yeah, collateral damage, they call it.
There is no such thing.
I know it, right. I understand that. But
no such thing. You know, they made Jews in concentration camps wear the Star of David.
Uh-huh.
If you want to make a globalist tyrant wear what best resembles them, put a bomb on his shirt, because that's what he would do to all of us.
Right.
George's Guidestones are just the tip of the iceberg. Look at the murals at Denver and International Airport sometime.
Yes. Yeah. It's telling. It's a cult of...
It has been all along. And it's been envisioned that way since the late 50s. Murmurs of it are all over Foreign Affairs, which is the periodical of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't do it, just poke your nose in some of the more recent things like this TPP thing coming up that a colleague of mine is going to speak about in a show that she has coming up. And she has learned on it. I'm not going to give much away because I'm interested in what she has to say. It's always an interesting surprise for me to see what people come up with on their own.
Yeah. I'm going to take a little break here. I'll be back in a few minutes. Can you please hold or take a break for yourself? And we'll be right back. Thank you.
All right.
Something you said about IMF recently, there was a news bulletin that the Fed said that they wanted to stop buying bonds, in other words, monetizing the debt, and the IMF forbade them from doing it, which I thought was kind of crazy. It seems like there's a level of economic warfare going on against not just one country against another. It seems to be that they're destroying the entire system.
Dismantling, yeah. It makes the rape and pillage of wealth that much easier. Pension funds, IRAs, all of these are going to be up for grabs if people just continue sitting on their haunches watching it happen.
Yeah.
Waiting for the famine that will ensue once the dollar is hyperinflated. What are you going to buy a loaf of bread with? You got $10,000 to pay for a loaf of bread?
No. No, I
Just
don't.
remember what happened towards the ends of the Weimar Republic in Germany.
Right. Yep. I read that was a leftover. A lot of that economic woe was leftover from World War I.
Oh, it was leftover from a design to loot one nation for the benefit of the bankers.
Right. Germany was extremely in debt after World War I, and they couldn't dig themselves out. And that's my understanding of history. The other thing is they were also even further in debt after World War II, and yet somehow...
It was going on in Russia, too.
Yeah.
So the international banking scam was responsible. I mean, after all, who started World War I? No one's found out who assassinated that Duke, that Crown Duke.
Mm-hmm.
No one's found out who assassinated him, but he had the most to gain. The people that loan money to countries for war.
Right.
And who is that? The Rothschilds.
Yeah. Well, this, again, I can't really get into their head, but it doesn't make any sense because it is not sustainable. They're actually dismantling the whole system that they set up. Or is there some other even more insidious system that they are trying to implement that I just don't understand?
I think there is a communication barrier between the implementers and the elite. I think the implementers are so fed up with the elite that they are leading them on with delusions of how they can escape the mess they created.
I see.
That they may still have bases on the moon or on Mars, or that the underground cities that they have built can sustain life longer than it can. Like I said all along, they go into holes, they're going to die like rats in the hole.
Okay, I'm starting to see a glimpse of how they envision the future is some sort of satanic utopia, and that they are engineering. So
yes.
they're the antithesis of the natural life, the pastoral life, as you put it. That actually explains a lot why they've gone out of their way to dismantle what natural systems existed on this world for a period of time. They've been systematically destroying all the tribal people, degrading the Earth's ecosystems, turning us all against one against another.
Let's look at what some of their programs are. Do you know who administers all the federal parks in this country, in the United States?
No, I don't.
United Nations.
Oh, okay.
And they have troops in them. They have all sorts of mechanisms operating in them because these are areas of wilderness that any opposition would use to conduct a war of opposition and a guerrilla-type resistance against them.
Right.
So they're getting rid of their cover.
Oh, God.
This is what deforestation in Vietnam was all about. This is their mentality. This is their mindset. This is why they're getting rid of deforesting the Amazon basin, where 20% of our oxygen comes from. When BP didn't use all its Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico, they shipped the rest to Australia. And now they intend to use it on the Great Barrier Reef, where 30% of the world's oxygen is produced. They've dumped plutonium waste in the Atlantic Trough, where another 30% is used. Now we're up to, 70% of the world's oxygen?
Wow.
Now they're working on the Pacific Ocean. 30% right there.
Yeah.
Where's our oxygen going to come from?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I'm actually feeling a little overwhelmed tonight, James. Because you've really expanded my thinking or my awareness of what's going on here. And it's making me feel very ill at ease.
I wish I could do it more cheerfully.
Well, you're such a nice person. I mean, I really enjoyed speaking to you off the air, too, last night. And I know you're not being malicious. I think you're just being completely honest, which I do appreciate. But it's like the messages that you're giving me and this audience are... extremely sobering and painful. I mean, I'm just telling you honestly what's happening to me, the reaction I'm having to this. And it's not because of you. It's just because what you're conveying here.
Well, most of us, including me, don't want to harm another human being. We don't want to harm most animals.
Yeah.
Now, bed bugs, I have a thing about. Yeah. But we don't want to harm. We don't want to cause suffering. And it's a hard thing to know that if we have to stand our ground, because the only reason that we're not already done in is because Americans won't give up their guns. Right. But we'd have already been interred, we'd already been done away with, and we'd be in the ground.
Just fertilizer.
They had this plan back in 2000. Mm-hmm. And I say this not to make you feel worse, but to feel better, because the fact is they have been set back in their agenda schedule now 3 times that I know of, maybe 4. Okay. So it can happen, and, Obama's not having his way. He doesn't know what to do because he's had his way up until now. Even though that there have been a number of people that have sufficient grounds to have him impeached, He knows he's been sitting on his laurels because he knows that the Supreme Court is packed and that those stooges in the Supreme Court won't do their job as far as judicial review, determining what is constitutional and what is not, because anything that he writes into executive law can be reversed by a decision of theirs that it's unconstitutional. And just about everything that he has signed into law under executive order is unconstitutional.
Right.
So there you have that they are part of the conspiracy, and many of them are Illuminati.
Right. Right. Which is directly connected to the Jesuit order. I do mention this in the conclusion of my second book, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. Did I send you a PDF of that, James?
Yes, you did. And
okay, good. Oh, okay.
Very good. Very good. Your work is impeccable, and you are correct. In fact, Disneyland is kind of a microcosm of Washington, D.C.
Well, Disney himself was a 33rd degree Mason, so it's not a surprise. Yeah.
That's what he was. And what's interesting is that you have 32nd degree Masons still telling people that the 33rd degree doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You notice that?
What I was told by a member of that organization is that the inner circle is truly isolated. The outer circle of Masons do not know about.
That's right.
Yeah, so they can be honestly ignorant spokespeople.
Willfully, even.
Yeah, willfully at some... Yeah, because they probably suspect these things, but they can't voice. Okay, so you'd also mentioned the NSA to me off the air about that they're spying on everybody. I think the way you positioned it to me was that they're using this information to blackmail people.
Well, that's what they do in Congress. They provide an administration with all they need to swing hinge voters.
Yeah.
And get things through that shouldn't be passed, and they're doing it now.
Right.
Of course, you can create crime. And you can create crime inviting people to fancy parties without their wives, where there are a lot of call girls present, and there are all kinds of drugs and fine wine. Yeah. And you can set them up. If they don't go for that, if they don't fall for things like that, you can set them up. There are various ways of doing that. And if they don't finally go for the brass ring that you will end up putting in their nose or worse, you can clone them. Okay.
Is that your opinion that cloning is far more advanced than we've been told, or is this some awareness that you actually have?
It is being done.
Okay, well.
And not only that, but there's so many things in the second technology. I point this out to people. I say, let's take an example that you can see for yourself. Mm-hmm. If you look at Lady Gaga's poker face video, you will see a woman that has thick thighs, structure that will not conform under any circumstances of conventional workouts or anything to the figure she has now. And the reason for that is her body's been sculpted. And this involves secret second technology where the bones are softened and reshaped. That's far more advanced than cloning.
Well, that might explain why she's been having problems standing up or walking recently.
It would.
Yeah.
It would. Technology is not the answer for many things, but people don't realize that, like, for instance, prosthetic surgery. For instance, having your knees repaired, your hips replaced, if you understand how complex that was and how it takes a team of doctors to do it well, and that you're not going to get a team of doctors and that you're not going to get that kind of professional attention, then you wouldn't be likely to do it, would you? You'd take your pain. But there are a lot of people that get benefit because they have a good doctor or they have a team of doctors or they can pay.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that don't, that are always worse off. And that's not the individual thing. It all depends on the degree of attention that they get, which is too much dependent on what they can pay.
Yeah. Getting back to the NSA Project Echelon, I had some other weird alphanumeric designation prior to being called Echelon, but specifically the Pentagon wanted the ability to spy on or monitor the activities of politicians because they found them to be completely untrustworthy. At least that's what it was written in it was the language of the original mandate. But I think your explanation is better, that they want to control, manipulate through blackmailing these people, knowing your every move through this system. because obviously it's not for terrorism. It's not being used for that at all, and it is global. The way they get around the constitutionality of it all, or the lack thereof, is by, again, this is my understanding of what I've read, was that they'll ask, let's say, for Great Britain to spy on our citizens, and we'll do the same for them. And that way we get around, so just exchange the information, and that sort of doesn't end run around any kind of legality.
Yeah. When Kennedy was assassinated, when JFK was assassinated, all the cameras in Dealey Plaza were taken, and if the film wasn't removed from them and destroyed, the cameras were, except for one. That was a photographer that was in the most prominent place that got the best series of videos obtainable. Videos that show not only the president being shot, but shows who shot him if you can find the unedited version.
You talking about the Zapruder?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That wasn't confiscated. He was in the most prominent place filming that whole affair, yet his camera wasn't confiscated.
I don't know, but I thought he turned the film over, then it was edited and handed back to him.
Not for years.
No.
Not for years.
Yeah.
And then when it was, in order to keep him quiet, because he knew what was on it, and so did half the other intelligence agencies in the world who had their own ways of acquiring copies.
Yeah.
So they could blackmail.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
So they could blackmail, yeah.
Okay, so he
made a lot of money off that, but he was paid millions of dollars to keep his mouth shut about what frames had been removed.
Oh, my God. All right.
But why wasn't it removed? It wasn't removed because he was a Zionist working for Israel.
Okay, and so Ruby was part of that too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Ruby would never have made those sacrifices. Ruby was a bagman for the mafia. Ruby had worked for Carlos Marcello from New Orleans because that was a territory of Marcello's.
Uh-huh.
He had run a casino for Jake Lansky in Cuba, and he had a lot of stakes.
Right,
but he was running the Carousel Club. He had afforded a connection between the mob and the police.
Right.
Frequent visitors was Officer Tibbet. Frequent visitors was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
Frequent visitors were some of the people that were indicted by Jim Garrison in New Orleans for conspiracy to kill JFK.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I can tell you some things about that. I can tell you some things that happened the day before the assassination there that tie Ruby, Oswald, and David Ferry together.
Okay. Since you brought it up, go ahead.
Jim Garrison's investigation was leaked prematurely. The night that it was leaked, David Ferry, who figured prominently in the conspiracy, committed suicide, supposedly.
Right.
His picture shows up in the Dallas Morning News the next day in Dallas. A taxi cab driver goes to the news desk that morning, right after he reads the paper and says, I can put this together. He said, on the morning before the assassination, I drove Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and this man, David Ferry, from Love Field to the Carousel Club. Mm-hmm. Now, to back up that, there's a lawyer sitting there in the club at the time at a booth eating his lunch. And in come the three of them, and they sit down at a booth right next to him, and he remembers the conversation verbatim, gave it to the Warren Commission, and the Warren Commission dismissed it. This is even mentioned in the Warren Commission report. They dismissed it because, get this, and I quote, memory was too good, and unquote.
Well, okay. Since when is that a problem?
When it's uncomfortable.
Or inconvenient, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And take Earl Warren. Earl Warren was head of the commission. Uh-huh. He visited Jack Ruby in his cell after Jack Ruby killed Oswald. Jack Ruby was upset, and he told Earl Warren, if you'll get me out of Dallas to Washington, D.C., I'll tell you everything I know, because if I even start here, they'll kill me. There's a transcript of this conversation, and here are Earl Warren's words. If you are afraid something you might say would be dangerous to you, don't say it.
Jesus. Okay, so everybody's compromised on some level or complicit, right?
Robert, if they hadn't had the whitewash all prepared and set in, they would never have done it. The same reason that the man that made the kill shot was sitting less than 4 feet away from the target.
Wow, that close? He wasn't the grassy knoll then?
No.
Wow.
He's driver of the limousine, Secret Service. If you ever watch this Zapruder, you will see Kennedy hit with the first shot. He brings his hands up and they go to his face. Suddenly, he brings them up to about his chin. Suddenly, his head goes back, and then the kill shot with his brains flying out the back of the head. After his head goes back. What causes his head to go back? The limousine is accelerated. It's the driver of the limousine who knows exactly where the kill shot will be, where his head will be, because he can anticipate in microseconds.
I've seen that. Okay, I've seen that. William Cooper was the one who started talking about this years ago. I attended one of those lectures.
And he was right. Of course, Bill Cooper was speaking from a learned point of view. That's why he was killed. He had a real copy of the gemstone file, one no one else has ever seen. And he tried to get that out, and he was told that if he got it out intact, they'd kill him.
Wow.
He was working on that. He was producing copies that weren't perfect, but then he had worked out a code where he would release one here, one there, and then the code would tell people how to put it together to get the real truthful one. And it'd blow your mind.
Okay, didn't know that.
It tied in Onassis.
Yeah, I did read part of that last night after talking to you. Now, the other thing you'd mentioned to me, something that I guess you actually have put it out there on a different show, is this thing with Captain Robert McDonald.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've seen the picture now of this thing. Now, some people say that this is an artist's, like a sculpture.
It is. We were fooled. We were hoaxed with that picture. That picture is turned up, and since then we realize that Rob McDonald has been hoaxed.
Okay.
He's been given something because this is such a sensitive area. This is bigger than Roswell.
What is?
He was...
The town?
What has happened there in Holland where he lives.
Okay. In the Netherlands, is this particular town, they're having paranormal activity and somebody's trying to keep a lid on it, so they're throwing out disinformation?
Yes, I know that Kevin Smith had found out something about it that he wanted to relay, and he wanted me on the show when he did.
Right.
And then he has a heart attack, goes to the hospital, comes home the next day or so, or maybe been 2 days, but with a stent in his heart.
Yeah.
He called me, and we talked, and he was excited. He was in a clear frame of mind. He was energetic. He was optimistic. He was up.
Yeah.
And so... that night, he dies in his sleep.
Yeah, and Jerry Wills had talked to him at around the same time you did, and he confirms everything you said about what Kevin's mood was and what he was interested in doing besides the music, which he was ready to do again.
Oh, yeah.
Or continue.
He was looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very high spirits about the music, obviously. That was a passion for him. Yes, he had told me and you and Jerry and obviously others about there was something very, very profound going on over there in the Netherlands, and that Rob McDonald was at the heart of it, or certainly had his finger on the pulse of it. So we can only speculate if this is what contributed to Kevin's death. I hope not, but as I told you off the air, he had mentioned to me, he said that accidents can be arranged. So hopefully...
Jerry revealed that while Kevin was involved in this, and it might have been on the show, he received a phone call.
Yeah.
And the phone call was from somebody, it wasn't Rob McDonald, that said that he had pictures of these animals.
Uh-huh.
And then all of a sudden, Kevin can hear him say, "What are you doing here?" And then there's a click and nothing. So we're talking about something here that they are pulling out all the stops to suppress. And I'm hearing all kinds of stories. At this time, of course, they have pulled out, but they have left their cleaners. And their cleaners are working over witnesses. People are losing their memory.
Wow.
All sorts of things are going on. I'm hearing all kinds of things. But because we've already had one hoax, I'm waiting to see what develops. And the last time I spoke with Rob McDonald, which was today, he had become ill over something that had happened to him online, and I'm waiting for him to get back in touch with me. I personally think that they were thinking that all of his supporters would jump ship on him and throw him under the bus and all this because of that picture, but I'm not. And I have faith in Mr. McDonald. I know enough, and so did Kevin, to know that he is quite a character, That he doesn't have to make things up to have wonderful stories to tell. And I do know that they will pull out the stops like they did in Roswell. They killed people. They did all kinds of things. And they'll do it here because this is even bigger. This relates to something that they don't want out.
Well, when you feel comfortable, as you get more information, could you please keep me posted and possibly come back and share that with this audience?
Maybe I can bring Rob McDonald with me.
That'd be good. Yes, I'm fascinated. Yeah, absolutely fascinated by his story with the popsicle boat.
Oh, I tell you what, it's something. He's got pictures of it.
Yeah.
He involved the kids in it, and they were so excited. He has a foundation for helping children, and it's a good band.
Right, but he got caught up in something that was pretty ugly. And the thing that captivated me about his story or those experiences is that they are not out of context. I have read many different accounts, especially in the area of that particular North Sea where he was. A lot of sailors have seen weird stuff coming out of the water, going into the water. So it wasn't a surprise to me other than the level of containment that's going on and all the blowback that he received just for, having the experience. Well, obviously because there was a lot of international media focused on his ship and the journey. So I guess that's where they felt very uncomfortable that
they even have a woman who devoted her life since 2009 to rag on him. She's got a site online that she advertises as CopenhagenUFO.com. Mm-hmm. You can go there and see for yourself. There's not a thing there on UFOs. It's all ragging on Rob McDonald. Every bit of it. And you can read between the lines if you want or whatever, but you will see that it's disingenuous. It's malinformation.
Yeah.
So what put her up to that, do you think? And who does she implicate in it? It's interesting, too. I won't say because this is a person who is in the ufology community, and Rob and I both have tried to contact him and see if he is actually connected to her, and she claims that he is, but he won't answer. So but I won't name him because it's not what we do on these shows, is it?
No, I'm not personally interested in doing that, but there is information coming out that's going to actually, take down people that are allegedly researchers and reporters in this field. As I sent you that link, I got another link today. Apparently this information just keeps coming up. It's not going to go away. It's very ugly. I don't want to be involved in it, but the reason I even know about it, as I told you off the air, is because my name was being thrown around too.
You're about as clean as a person can get. You don't make any side steps or anything, so I'd stand up for you, Robert.
Well, thank you, but I'm just saying that I thought it was something else entirely that caught me up in that, whatever the heck that is that's been going on. But anyway, look, I'm sorry I'm being vague here because I obviously can't talk about it, but maybe I shouldn't even brought it up. But
exopolitics is being pulled apart.
It is. I know.
Yeah.
I see this all the time.
Of course, if I had to pick between who was telling the truth and who wasn't, I would go with our good friend Albert Weber, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but I've never known him to be disingenuous, and he has always had some wonderful people on his shows, hosting like Lauren Murray, who I think a great deal of.
Right.
She is absolutely right about Fukushima being a tool for genocide.
Wow, I know. That's unfortunate. I wish she was wrong, but that's all I can conclude either. I mean, I'm not a whistleblower or... It does remind me, though, since you brought that up again, coincidentally, when I started working for Honda Research and Development in 1985, I was given an assignment, aside from helping to produce a very innocuous monthly newsletter for upper management, I was given the task of doing a special report about fusion reactors, which I thought was weird.
Fusion? Okay? Not fission, but fusion?
Correct.
Wow.
Yep. Actually, specifically, aneutronic fusion reactors.
Wow.
That were, and actually are, portable. This technical term is flight weight, meaning that you don't need to bolt it to the ground.
Or build lead plate shields.
Yes. Aneutronic
They don't produce isotopes.
Right. And there's very little neutronic radiation, so therefore you don't need the shielding. The trick was maintaining at least the way I understood it, was maintaining the magnetic bottle or the containment field of the reaction or reactor. Supposedly it wasn't strong enough. I learned, now this is really nuts. I was doing this because I needed money for the family. And yet, I'm trying to think what it is the anniversary of the America dropping the bomb on the Japanese, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the local newspaper, because that was part of my job, in order to help create a monthly newsletter, I would have to go through multiple newspapers every day and digest it, summarize it, and put it together. Well, as I'm reading the local newspaper, there was a editorial from a veteran, retired vet, military guy, who had said the Japanese had their own bomb program in World War II. He says, if you doubt me, read this book, Japan's Secret War. So I had a few minutes on my hand. I looked into the local phone book. I found this guy's phone number because he published his name. And I said, excuse me, sir, I just read your editorial. Are you serious about this? And he said, well, did you read the book? And I said, no, I just read your editorial. He says, well, read the damn book and then you'll know that how serious I am. And I thought, okay. And I thanked him. I hung up. And later that day, I went and looked for the book. I actually ended up buying a second copy to send to my uncle, who is he's retired military intelligence. He'd served in the Pacific, not only as a fighter pilot, but then he was part of a security detail for the nuclear weapons program in the Pacific. I let him read it, and he goes, well, that certainly explains a lot, you know.
Wow.
He didn't disagree with the damn thing that was in there. In fact, even my manager, when I brought it up to my manager at Honda, he's like, oh, yeah, the Allies grabbed one of our centrifuges and threw it in the Tokyo Bay. And I'm thinking, this didn't make it into the history books at all. But what is alleged in that book is that they were pretty far along. They were actually working in concert with the Nazis. Because if you remember, that was part of the justification for the program. We can't let the Nazis get their hands on it first. We have to beat them to it. But there's no mention of Japan, right?
Yeah.
Right? And the thing is that they were spying their asses off on us. They had a special team down in Mexico City at the Hotel Majestic. And they were just handing out $100 bills like it was candy to certain Mexican nationals to come up, cross the border, literally cross over into restricted areas where nuclear testing had occurred. And they would fill their pockets with dirt and then bring it back across the border so that the Japanese could then analyze it. But in any case, they had a secret laboratory, a place called Honan, Korea. So shortly after we detonated the first bomb, they detonated their first test bomb in the bay there. Yeah, they were pretty close. They were really close to doing that. And there was a lot of other technology that they had that is not being really admitted to. So I spent almost 2 years on that report. Well, here's how it went. I was going around making phone calls and also actually visiting certain facilities like campuses. I was tracking down something that had been written by a physicist. I think his name was Bogdan Maglovich. He was talking about how great it would be someday and all this stuff. And I think he was at the University of Irvine. And when I went there to look for him, he was already gone. People remembered him. So I had to go to various places and track this down. It made me really uncomfortable. But my family needed the money desperately at the time because we had a young child and my wife was staying at home. So I was dancing on a very fine line. I really was, and I knew it too. Because they told me, I should say my manager told me, that all the information was going back to a secret laboratory in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
They never published this. This was like, not publicly. They've never admitted it. I try not to talk about it too much, but since, you know, the days of Fukushima, I guess I'm over it at this point because Japan is probably not going to survive.
Unlikely.
I understand. I guess I'm trying to put this into context for people. Certain elements of the Japanese government made a deal with the devil once they started going down that road. And it came back to bite them ultimately with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But obviously, what's happened now is even worse. Again, I'm sure this was all planned. I think they may have even been baited into it. But for whatever reason, that's what really happened. They definitely had a nuclear weapons program in World War II. And I'm sure there's people out there that disagree with what I just said, but I don't give a damn, honestly. I know what I know, okay? I was there. I spent a lot of hours of my life doing the research for them. And they weren't just like casually interested in this. What I also found out was that we were doing it too. We had these flight-weight reactors. Of course, they were fission, but they were mounted inside bombers. The main motivation there was to have an aircraft that never really needed refueling so that they could just drop nuclear bombs. Why not? A nuclear-powered bomber, right, with nuclear weapons. That was the thinking of the day. So that was confirmed to me.
They were trying to develop one in General Dynamics.
Yeah, right. And Popular Mechanics, or was Popular Science, ultimately ran a thing about the Air Force flying saucer. It was a flying wing of sorts. Sort of looked like the heel of a shoe, but it was also a very exotic aircraft that seemed to be part of that deal. Nobody seemed to know this, but I was very clear. When I looked at the diagrams of it, I go, okay, well, that's where the reactors were going. It's real obvious. I mean, one of the things I found out, I won't say how, but is that the Navy actually came up with a better idea of all the branches of the military. They've had portable nuclear reactors for the longest time, right? Functional.
They had one at Little America. That was the cause of Operation Hydrant.
Wow, that far back. Okay. So one of the things that I was told by somebody in the industry was that instead of using what they call a magnetic bottle to contain the fusion reactor reaction, that the Navy had come up with a composite material that actually could contain the heat of a fusion reaction without melting. And so it's gone forward. As far as I know, those reactors are functional, but of course they don't exist officially. So anyway, I'm sorry I even brought this up, actually.
Yes, they developed a metal that has an internal heat coefficient of 0. I can tell you how they developed it.
Yeah, I figured you would, because you had mentioned what you told me about how the advanced metal structure, the way it was formed in a vacuum, sort of a crystalline thing. It reminds me of what Marshall Vogel had said about alleged pieces of metal that he analyzed from Billy Meyer.
Yeah.
It sounded exactly like that.
We have had people on this earth, in this lineage, like the Moors, who could do just astronomical things with metal. And they used meteoric iron. And I saw a very elaborately carved handle on one of these blades, these knives made of meteoric iron. Most incredible thing I ever saw. And it was in my hands for a little while. I didn't have the sheath it came in, which would have made it worth a small fortune. But I showed some people that deal in military and historical oddities and so forth, and they were willing to pay quite a bit of money just for that dagger. It's made of meteoric iron.
Wow.
Black as it could be.
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason I was going down that road is because there's just so much more going on. Oh, there was one other thing that really kind of ticked me off about the whole deal, and they haven't released it yet either, is that, specifically talking about Honda, was that they had developed a very small but extremely powerful turbine generator. Sort of reminds me of some of the ideas that Tesla had. But you were using these rare earth magnets, really powerful rare earth magnets, and spinning it up to high speeds. You could use basically any lean gas, which is clean, burns clean, and all they had to do was spin it up to a certain speed. They have a very fantastic Formula One racing program at Honda, so they know how to build piston motors. But see, this is the thing. People don't realize that Honda has all kinds of motors and designs. And this is one of them. You could literally hold this thing in your hand. It could power up an entire office building or a small city block.
But it'll never go into production
and be available to the
consumer.
No. Nope. And I don't even know why they told me about it, honest to God. And they were testing me. So one of the things that we were kind of tossing around, I worked in a futurist group. As part of marketing, we were always very forward-looking. We were ahead of everybody. We were looking at minimum 10 to 20 years ahead. Technology and trends. Futurism doesn't mean anything to anybody. But anyway, that's what we were doing. And so we were saying the best configuration would just be to have one of these things, a smaller version, like the size could fit in your pocket. You could do this in a car. It would be incredibly efficient. And you would have like 2 or 4 electric motors. And you wouldn't need a bunch of bullshit batteries, excuse me, but that's what they are. You would have capacitors that would feed the system on a real-time basis. Once you fire up the turbine, you've got more than enough electricity to run everything in the car, even with 2 wheels. It would be like a slot car without the track. It would just burn the tires right off the car.
Well, every once in a while they come out with something and it's produced for a little while. I have a watch
Yeah.
It's Seiko, and you won't see very many of these out there, but it has battery units, has quartz movement.
Uh-huh.
But the battery is charged by an automatic winding device. So you never have to replace the battery.
Okay.
I've been wearing it now for 2 months. It has not lost a second. I've never seen a watch as accurate as this little jewel.
And it's self-winding, you say? Just the motion of your arm?
Yeah, but the movement is a quartz movement that's operated on a battery, but the self-winding mechanism keeps the battery charged. Isn't that neat?
So it's a hybrid. Oh, that's weird. Okay, that's cool.
Oh, man, and I love it.
I don't wear watches. They drive me crazy. I don't like jewelry or watches really at all. That's kind of how I am, but...
there goes your Christmas present.
Actually, this is my early Christmas present. Speaking with you again, getting to know you, specifically after Kevin passed away, you and I started to actually talk off the air quite a bit, and I really appreciate your friendship, James.
I'm no substitute for Kevin, but
no.
I'll try to keep you entertained.
Well, no, it's not even about that.
I can't sing to you now, Robert.
Yeah. Well, Kevin wasn't much of a singer either, but God, he cracked me up. He was such a character. I mean, he is such a character. And when I'm talking to you, I sense a lot of personality like Kevin and intelligence too. Look, whether Kevin was still with us or not, I really, really appreciate your friendship. It's like getting to know you, especially at the time when, I think we were all suffering.
Well, I like you too, Robert.
Thanks, James. I really appreciate it. And I don't know what the future holds. And if I did, I probably wouldn't want to overly indulge people in, I just don't think it's healthy. We have to be here and now and take care of the situation at hand. That's really, I think, what your message is coming across to me.
Alleviate as much suffering, hope for the best.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a time to be living in because we're going to see justice done one way or the other.
One way or the other, yes.
Yeah, if we live out a natural life expectancy, probably won't. But if we do, we're going to live to see. We won't be dying, leaving our loved ones behind in a hopeless situation. It'll be resolved one way or the other because, I see more and more people just fed up with what's going on. They booed McCain. They booed Hillary Clinton en masse. That's good because it shows that they're beginning to enjoy reality.
Historically, that's what happens to people that take that kind of dictatorial position. Tyrants always get shamed. Even though they have no shame, in the end, they are shamed publicly, ridiculed, and run out of town or worse.
I would vote for worse.
I bet you. I know they deserve it, but yeah.
I want to see Hillary Clinton in a clown suit with these big, huge, size 15 shoes and see her face painted up and see one of these big feet kicking her along, boom, boom, boom. You're not moving fast enough. Move, move. That would make my year. Yeah,
I know John Kerry has a very unpleasant fate ahead of him, too. I think everybody that goes down this path, I actually, on some level, they have my sympathy because I know it doesn't end well for them historically. It never has and it never will.
No. Anybody that's devoted to war on misinformation, disinformation, and just lies is a monster.
Literally.
It's a monster. What they're doing is they're saying that my personal ambitions are more important than people's lives.
It's so sick. It's just so sick.
If I had to suggest a clone to you, it's Mr. Kerry.
Okay. Let me ask, since you brought it up, how long has this program been going on, the cloning?
My guess would be about 12 years.
So when Dr. Beater was doing those shows back in the 80s, do you think he was just full of it?
No. One of the things that I said had no point until they learned how to interface the human mind with the computer. Because you had to load that clone's mind with enough information, personality, and so forth that he could pose as a genuine article. Of course, there are dead giveaways in the fact that every time when Kerry was sitting before the Senate subcommittee on the voting whether to go into Syria or not, or whether to take a military action against Syria, every time his face would come in full, the camera, it would blur. Why?
I don't know, but
they want to hide a full frontal of him, or what?
Well, they say it was Botox, but whatever it was a bad job.
Why would a man ever use Botox?
Well, I think Biden did it too, but Hillary, when she was up there for questioning, remember how she conveniently was like having some brain problem? She couldn't see out of one eye, and she seemed really completely confused. They've obviously done something to her.
Yeah. Didn't have anything to do with soul removal. She didn't have one.
Yeah. Okay. Is that part of what's going on with the cloning?
No, souls are inviolable, and I shouldn't have said that. That's just my own prejudice speaking, because I can't stand that woman. She killed those men, women, and children at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, and if Janet Reno had her say, in fact, Janet Reno used that as a blackmail card to keep her job through the second term of the Clinton administration. And Dick Morris is the one that revealed that. He didn't know exactly what it was about the Branch Davidian thing, but he knew that Janet Reno had something to say about Hillary Clinton's part in it.
Oh, God. Yeah, there seems to be a long history of burning people alive that the Satanists really seem to enjoy.
Shooting a woman with a newborn baby who's nursing on her in a doorway. And then, do you know that the head of the SWAT team that was back behind the Branch Davidian buildings when the buildings caught fire, shooting anyone trying to escape, was the same sorry SOB that killed that woman at Ruby Ridge?
Wow. No,
Japanese jerk?
Really?
Yes. That was his reward for murdering a woman with a newborn baby holding it in her arms. Didn't have a gun. Was waiting for her husband.
Okay.
This country's got heavy debts to pay, and people that stand in the way will pay them for the villains. That's the way justice is rendered.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm just going to let it stand as it is, because I think you're speaking truth to power, and this, unfortunately, is where we're at. So if we don't clean up the mess, we're going to have to suffer with it. And,
that's right.
Yeah.
And your children, men and women out there, your children deserve so much better. But it's going to take courage and determination and waking up to provide for those children the world they need and deserve. Yeah. You brought them here.
Right. All right,
Pull them
James.
away from those video games and do things with them and teach them, and you learn yourself.
Yeah, I had to deal with that with my son. He was getting into that Call of Duty. And I basically had to take it away from him and said, look, I don't mind if you do other things, but, he says, I know the difference. And I said, yeah, but part of your brain doesn't. These things are designed. Right. They're designed by the military to train you, to desensitize you to shooting other people. I said, that's not entertainment. That's not fun.
No.
So, yeah, I've dealt with it. I don't know how successfully. Or I should say I'm dealing with it because my son has just entered college, and that's a whole nother level of crapola that I'm trying to, help him through that.
He'll be hugging you for that soon. It won't be too long before there won't be any daddy you this, daddy you that. He said, there'll be, daddy, thank you for helping me becoming a man.
Yeah. Well, a good man. There's a difference. Anybody can grow up. Doesn't mean you're really going to mature into a decent human being. And that's why...
And you're not a man. You're a thing.
Yeah, you're just another, cog in the wheel. I don't want to contribute to that insanity, okay? And as best as I can. It's one of the reasons I decided to be a stay-at-home dad. Although
that's a good thing to be. And let me tell you something.
Yeah.
That is a respect for your child.
Right, because he's the future. I also know, especially as a young man, I didn't have any guidance from my father. And I was, radically derelict for a good portion of my teen years. And I didn't want my son to have that experience. If I had the choice, and I did, I worked part-time at home. I was still working for Honda. 5 or 6 years I worked at home part-time for them, even after I left the office, so that I could be with my son. Instead of leaving him in a daycare situation, I didn't feel comfortable about that. It actually worked out. I mean, it was good for him, but it was also, in a way, it actually helped heal me from a lot of the emotional scars that I developed growing up without any real fatherly guidance. So I'm grateful for that. And I guess I'm just mentioning it to let people know that we can always do better. Our true potential is much greater than we've ever been led to believe. And so this is not really, I know we've talked about a lot of stuff tonight, but it's not to press anyone. It's just to awaken people, alert them, alert you, this audience, that the peril that we face together. Nobody's immune from this crap.
Well, all that money that they gave bankers and corporate heads for screwing over shareholders and screwing over pension funders, All that money that they gave them, if they had taken that same amount of money and paid off everyone's debt, paid it off, student debts, credit card debts, house payments, everything. They'd have paid all that off. They'd have still had money left over to give to people. Yes, everybody in this country, every single person in debt in this country. And they could have used that money to pay off the banks, to pay off, And the only difference would be there wouldn't be a bunch of diamond-heeled son of a bitches taking their money out of this country and bringing it down that much further.
You know what always amazes me when I hear it come up is foreign aid. Where in the hell are we getting the money? My understanding is we're at least $70 trillion in debt now, if you factor everything in there.
It's not foreign aid. It's foreign bribes to foreign national leaders to do what the State Department wants them to do.
That's what it is. That's what it is. But where do they get that line of credit? Obviously the Fed. But isn't that criminal? I mean, if anybody else tried to pull a stunt like that, they'd end up in jail.
Yeah, well, these people need to end up in jail, too.
Right.
I think the first thing to do is take these action-packed committees and find a big hole in the ground for them. I think that everybody who runs for public office needs to draw from the same well. Yeah. That all of the media corporate concerns run television stations and radio stations by law will afford equal time to everyone that's running for public office. If it's at the local level, say Dallas, Fort Worth, or wherever you live, then it's local radio stations, TV stations that afford these messages equally across the board to everyone, free. Yeah. That's running for office. It qualifies. And then do it on a national scale. So there's no money being spent to determine the outcome. And then these votes, they take an equal number from each party. If they're independents running, they have to take an equal number. And in each precinct or each district, however they're compiling the votes, they sit there and everybody works together to come up with the figures using pencil and pad. And they sign the pads. They're tallied right then and there in front of watchers from all the parties concerned that are watching over their shoulders. And they come up with the figures and call them in on the phone to people on the other end of the same phone. And that's the honest-to-God way. What difference does it make if we go through paying billions and billions of dollars for machines that can be fixed and rigged? Yeah. And people don't believe this. They need to see a documentary that was made. It's a full movie. It's called Hacking America, and they know exactly how those last 3 elections were rigged. And I'm talking about for the presidency. Right.
Okay, James. I'm going to wrap it up here, but I definitely look forward to our next conversation, and I do appreciate your time, as always. And,
anytime, Robert, it's my pleasure. Anytime you would like. You don't have to ask me. Just tell me when and the place and time, and I'll be there, and we'll have our duel. No. Okay. But no, I'm available. I think you're an honest person. I think you have your heart's in the right place, and I think your son is going to be very proud to call you father.
Thank you very much, James. All right. Well, I'm honored to know you and have you on the show here. And I'm going to keep in touch with you, whether you like it or not. I'm going to keep in touch.
Please do. Please do. I would be that much lonelier if you didn't. We're losing too many of the good people.
That's for sure. That is for darn sure. Yep. Okay. Well, you take care.
Thank you. You too.
Right. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Oh, God. That was a very interesting conversation. James Horak. If you want to see his website, it's emvsinfo.blogspot.com. Yes. emvsinfo.blogspot.com. James Horak, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I did. It's been a thoughtful Thursday, September 12th, 2013. Till next time, good night and God bless.